But don't worry, we will have breaks in that time. So we are going to spend the first section looking at the peer review methodology. We're using peer review for Consolidate, and there are kind of processes associated with that. So the hope of this training is that you'll all get clear about the purpose of the training, the purpose of the methodology, but then really it's about getting super clear about what you need to do in what order. So there are lots and lots of documents which have been produced which you can refer to after this training. Alexandra's just mentioned the SharePoint, which is under construction and looks great. So we are going to look at that until about, until about kind of 11:30, 40-ish. We'll have a break before then, don't worry. And then we are going to pick up on the self-assessment. Basically, we're then going to kind of stop looking at peer review generally, and we are going to move on to thinking about the Lublin visit specifically, because the Lublin visit is the first to come up. It's the first of the whole project. And so it's a bit of a test case for us all. We're very pleased. We're very pleased it's happening in Lublin, because you've been super efficient in getting back your papers. Thank you. And so we're going to look at their self-assessment form and try and work out the focus of the visit in that second stage. So I'm going to be leading this first stage, which is about peer review generally, and Bella will lead the second stage, which is about the Lublin visit. Now, I think we better just jump in, really. We have some slides, and Alexandra's going to help with that, I think. Right-ho. So this tells you exactly what I've just told you, which is we're now going to look at peer review and Consolidate. Now then, what are we going to cover in this training? We're going to start by looking at what peer review is, the purpose of it, and the principles underpinning it, and importantly, how those principles are put into practice. They're not just nice words, they're things we do. Then we're going to talk about what preparation is needed before the visit, and then we will take a break after that. All right, so everybody can pace themselves. And then after our break, we're going to come back and we're going to look at what happens during the peer review visit itself. Then a brief note on action planning, and then recap and the next steps. The really important thing about this training is that I will take you through the basics, but I'm sure on some occasions I will not be clear. So when I am not clear, please ask questions. Can I ask my colleagues Bella and Alexandra, just if you see a hand go up and I don't see the hand, could you just alert me, because it's sometimes difficult to keep an eye on everything.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Okay, now I mentioned that this training has the peer review manual. So there is a whole manual which has all of this in it and a bit more. And that's going to be on the SharePoint. And so you can make reference to that to your heart's content. Okay, sorry, Alexandra, on we go. Right, so the first bit, as I said, was about purpose, the principles, and the framework for Consolidate peer review. Just to say, peer review exists in many forms, okay? So you can have peer review which goes over weeks of visits. So what we've done is we've looked at kind of best practice from lots of different projects. We've thought about the particular constraints of Consolidate. Of course, there are some. We have visits of a certain length, for instance, so we have to fit peer review into that structure. And so this is the Consolidate peer review methodology. Okay, now then, so peer review, as mentioned in the kickoff meeting, but always worth kind of reinforcing, peer review is an active process. of evaluating a city against the benchmark key factors. Now we will kind of come on just to remind you what this benchmark is, in case anybody's forgotten. I'm sure you haven't, but just in case. And in the way in which peer review visits happen is really different from the way in which some of you, at least, may have experienced visits in recent projects. It's not so much that people go around and visit and get some good information on the way, but kind of see interesting things. This is really active. You are interviewing people, you are taking notes, and then you are analysing what they say in order to come up with some recommendations. So to that degree, I'm sorry, everybody, it is more work for the people who are on the visit, much more work. This isn't so when you look in your diary and you say, oh, hooray, I'm going to Lublin for a week. That will be a nice break away from my kids or my dogs or whatever. No, no, no. You're going to be working for the whole of this visit. And when Lublin goes to visit your city, they will be working too. So the aim of it then, when we all get there, is we are trying to identify things that the city is doing really well, so the strengths, and then things that it could improve. And we're focusing our attention on the key factors from the benchmark, which we as a COP have chosen to focus the visit on. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in the session, which Bella will be leading. We're going to choose those key factors. But so we're looking for good things and areas for improvement. And then through the process we have in peer review, we're going to analyse what we learn, the evidence we gather, and we're going to make recommendations for change. The very last session of the visit will be with political leaders and senior managers who need to hear the recommendations and who can act on them. So this is all geared to try and increase awareness and increase commitment within the city to action plan. We'll get onto that later in the training, but it may be that some of the recommendations we make are picked up in the action plan for Consolidate, but it may be as well there are other recommendations, and you as visiting cities can make some suggestions as to how improvements can be made, drawing on your own experience. That's why it's called peer review. You have experience which is valuable, which you bring to this review. Okay, so you're going to be interviewing. Oh, sorry, back one, please. Just flip. Oh, yes, no, I said it, action plan. Yeah, just to reassure you, during the peer review visit, we're not writing the action plan. That happens after the visit. What we're doing is we're coming up with ideas for the action plan which may shape it. Okay, but that's not one of our tasks during the visit itself. That will happen afterwards. Okay, now on. Now, the principles. There are some principles for every peer review. What makes it work well? That's the thing about principles. So we've got those here, and then with just a little think about how those happen in Consolidate. So you need a clear objectives and a structure. You need to be clear what you are reviewing, what you're looking for. And the way in Consolidate we get clear about that is by using the benchmark. We create a benchmark. It has a top level standard for the benchmark. In our COP, it's about the city adopting an approach which is about supporting a coordinated mechanism. We'll come on to the benchmark in a bit. But we use the benchmark and the key factors, the ingredients for success, as the structure. So again, that's what we're doing in the second session. We're going to be looking at which ingredients in particular we're going to be examining. So that's our structure. And obviously we have a very clear, I hope, methodology as well that we're applying here. The second principle, which is really, really important, is about honesty. If we're not honest, it won't be very valuable. So things to remember about this: remember, your city will be reviewed as well. So you want honest feedback, but you also want constructive feedback. So that's also what you're invited to give out during visits. And the other point about honesty is it may be in some of the interviews we do during peer review, it might be that the host city thinks we'd get more honest answers if we talk to the people on their own. I've seen this happen in various visits over the years. I remember, for instance, meeting with migrant associations in Genoa, and the host city funded those organizations. So it was quite problematic for them to criticize. So the host city very brilliantly said, you meet with them on your own, because they'll probably be more honest and open with you. So that's another way in which we encourage honesty. Constructive is the next principle, and geared for improvement. So, you know, we're not there to criticize, we're there to help. So the way in which we do that in Consolidate is we use in the analysis workshops the plus delta framework, which is an incredibly simple framework. All it means is look at all the things which are going really well, and then look at all the things where there's room for improvement. And we present them like that. We think about them like that, and we present them like that. The fourth principle is around having similar experiences. So the kind of basis of peer review is that if you get your peers to come and look at what you're doing, they'll be able to say something helpful because they have similar experiences. And so your experiences within your cities are really valuable and the bedrock of success for this process. The other thing is as well, we also need to learn about the context of the city, because obviously your experience happened in your city, and in Lublin or Zagreb or wherever, there is a different context, politically, culturally, socially, demographically, etc. So we learn about that through the needs analysis, which we've already conducted, but also the baseline review, which Lublin has completed and has a bit more information in that. Humility is key. I mean, I'm sure it goes without saying, but something that works in your city might not necessarily work in another city. I'm sure you all know that, but just we offer things rather than insist. But a really good point, I think, for you all just to remember is, particularly when we get on to the final presentation, it's often really nice and really helpful to illustrate that final presentation by saying, here's something we tried in our city which really worked well. So you can illustrate it with kind of case studies without insisting that that's what the city does. Okay, fifth principle is that it's in depth. I mean, I think you all know that. You're having this training, you've already had another training. The visit is very intensive. There are 2 full days of interviewing, and there's this headquarters. I think of it as the visit headquarters, which is called the base room, which every city will need to identify. And that is the place which we all come back to, and we debrief, and our teams think about what you learned in the interview, and we input them into the evidence collection tool, which will be excitingly revealed later in this training. So it's in depth. And then finally, commitment to both host and peer reviewers. It's kind of the same thing, but slightly differently said. You have to listen, you have to be engaged, you can't switch off, you can't check your messages, all of that. So that's the peer review principles and how we're putting them into practice here. So on we go. Right, the good old benchmark. Now, we have sent you the most recent version of the benchmark. There were no changes in this other than the high level standard, which we realized we had not properly expressed. But what the benchmark does is benchmarks are about one standard. And that kind of encompasses the whole of the benchmark. And our standard is about one-stop shops. But as we discussed before, it's not that we're saying every city must have a one-stop shop. It's a bit bigger than that, because some cities are not going to have one building. They're going to have services based in multiple places. So it's not about the building, it's about the coordination of services and making those joined up. So we have suggested migrants, that the benchmark standard is migrants needing support in the city can easily access and navigate well-coordinated service provision through a one-stop shop approach. And that's our standard. That's what we are trying to assess in each visit. And that's what the key factors all relate to. The key factors are, okay, if that's the benchmark standard, the key factors then break it down. They are, as already said, the ingredients needed to meet this high level standard. Just to note, no city is expected to be doing 10 out of 10 in relation to all standards. It's always the case that you're doing really well in one, but in another, not so well. That's always the case. It would be a bit weird if there was a perfect city. So just to reassure people on that. And then the baseline report self-assesses against these key factors or ingredients. We focus the visit on one or more of the key factors. And we're going to decide that later, as I've said several times. The interviews are collecting evidence relating to the key factors in the benchmark. And the analysis we do through the evidence collection tool will be focused on these key factors. So you can see, I hope from this, that we haven't just been beating your brains on the benchmark because we think it's fun. This is absolutely central to the peer review process. And yeah, so we just all need to be kind of really clear about what the benchmark says. And as I say, that's our suggestion for the top line benchmark standard. Okay, are there any questions on purpose and principles? Anything, please raise your hand if so. I can't see any at the moment. Anybody want to make a comment at all? Is it super clear? All right, let's get into the weeds, as the Americans say, about what we do then in what order. Now, here's a helpful at a glance overview. Thanks, Sylvie, for writing that. That's good to know. Okay, an at a glance overview of the key milestones and processes and consolidate. So I'll just take you through this quickly, and then we'll move on to the preparation-y bit of all of this. So that first column on the left-hand side is just about how you learn about peer review. I suppose we could add in how Eurocities and migration work and European network have been formulated. We've been looking at all the kind of different types of peer review methodology, but let's leave that out. So how you learn about it, you had a training in the kickoff meeting, and the slides from that training are on the SharePoint. And then there is this training, the COP online training that you're having now. And then you have these manuals and templates, which are on the SharePoint. And then, really importantly, if you have any questions or you think, oh God, what do we do in what order again? Or what did she mean by this? You please contact Bella and myself, because that's the whole point of us in one way. We're here to support you to make sure that this isn't a confusing process, but a process which helps. And also, of course, you're going to be learning about how to do peer review and consolidate by doing it. So we'll have the visit, and then we'll have a think about the visit and what went well. We might make some slight changes after that. So that's you. So moving on at the top. Oh, I have a wasp. Oh. moving on for the central one there, how we learn about individual cities before the visit. So really important to get our heads into gear. What is it like in Lublin? What's the context it's dealing with? And therefore, what are the kind of recommendations which might make sense? So we do that by the needs analysis. You will remember back in months ago, you filled out a needs analysis with lots of detail. Well, that's available and really helpful. And we've synthesized, we have a shortened version of that in the baseline report, which Lublin has by now filled out, and Zagreb you will be filling out very soon. And then we will move on next year, well, later this year, to Nantes. And that will be filled out. And then the baseline review and planning session will also help us look at the city's self-assessment and process that, ask questions, challenge where we think that looks very high or that looks very low in terms of the score, and ask more questions about the city. So that's how we learn about the city. And then during the visits itself, we learn about individual cities through interviews and meetings, which really take up all of the first 2 full days of the visit. And at the end of those days, we have debrief sessions, and we may have them in